Hi, my name is Vincent Piazza. I'm a Social Security disability lawyer from Baltimore, Maryland. And today what I'd like to discuss with you is step 2 of sequential evaluation. Step 2 is severity. In essence, does the individual have a severe impairment? Now, what I'd like to do is kind of run through what the definition of a severe impairment is, talk briefly about basic work-related activities, the de minimis rule, and how Social Security looks at a combination of impairments. Let's begin. The definition of a severe impairment at step 2 is whether or not a person has an impairment or combination of impairments which significantly interferes with the ability to do basic work-related activities. Now, in order to have a severe impairment, it has to either last for 12 months or result in death. And it must be a medically determinable impairment. So even though you may have an individual who has a fever or who has pain or has a headache, those are symptoms. Now the question is, what is the medically determinable impairment which is actually driving those symptoms? And it's the impairment which must be severe. So, what are basic work-related activities? In essence, all work activity, all, can be broken down into certain subcomponents which are called basic work-related activities. The ability to sit, to stand, to lift, to bend, to stoop, crouch, to crawl, to hear, see, and speak, and the ability to be exposed to, let's say, heat, humidity, or other pulmonary irritants from a physical perspective. From a mental health perspective, basic work-related activities deal with the ability to understand, carry out, and remember instructions, be able to respond appropriately to coworkers, supervisors, and the public, and the ability to adapt and deal with changes in a routine work environment. So, severity at step 2 was supposed to be a de minimis standard, just a way for Social Security to kind of weed out the most insignificant of impairments. Colds, athlete's foot, acne, those kind of things. Although conditions, and although medically determinable, they're not significant because they're not expected to last for 12 months or result in death, and they don't yield limitations in basic work-related activities. Now, at step 2, it's one of the more easier steps of sequential evaluation, but it's also been the one that's been most litigated. And the reason is because Social Security has a history of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Let me explain myself. Social Security has a tendency to say that very significant impairments aren't severe at step 2 because they're under control. But just because a condition is under control doesn't mean that it isn't producing limitations in basic work-related activities. In essence, just because the condition is under control only means that it's being medically managed and not getting worse or progressing. Now, let's go over a couple examples. Frequently, Social Security would say that various cardiac conditions aren't severe because maybe someone had a heart attack and they had bypass or surgical intervention, and now their symptoms are being controlled with medications like nitroglycerin. But the person still has that underlying medically determinable impairment, that cardiac condition. And that cardiac condition, although controlled, still results in significant exertional limitations in standing, walking, lifting, and carrying, and those kind of things. Likewise, individuals may have various pulmonary impairments like COPD or asthma or fibrosis or those kind of things. Now, their shortness of breath may be controlled with inhalers or nebulizers or various kinds of medications. Nevertheless, those conditions are still severe because the individual still has limitations around dust, smoke, fumes, poor ventilation, heat, humidity, etc. So just because they're controlled doesn't mean that they're not severe at step 2 of sequential evaluation. And last but not least, individuals who have mental health impairments. They may be bipolar or schizophrenic or have generalized anxiety disorders. Again, those individuals' conditions may be controlled because they're no longer, let's say, psychotic or suicidal as long as they're taking their medications. Nevertheless, they're still severe impairments because they result in significant limitations in concentrating, interacting with people, and adapting to various workplace changes. Now today, even though you may have an individual that does not have a severe impairment, what Social Security is required to do is to look at a combination of all those severe impairments. If that combination still results in significant limitations in basic work-related activities, then the individual has satisfied step 2, and the reviewer of the record would have to then proceed to step 3, step 3 of sequential evaluation. So let's kind of recap. Severity, a relatively easy step of sequential evaluation, has to have an impairment or combination impairments, which is significantly interfering with basic work-related activities. It's a de minimis rule, and now Social Security is required to look at a combination of impairments at step 2. That's severity. Soup to nuts. Thank you for your attention.